Hey there, welcome to Film in the Blink. My name's Ian, I watch a lot of movies. Here's everything I watched this month. I started the month with 1991's Boyz in the Hood, written and directed by John Singleton. Has anyone ever held court in a film as much as Lawrence Fishburne does in this? Give him some scenes with Angela Bassett and legally you can't look away from the screen. The film itself lived up to the hype thanks in good part to John Singleton's exceptional direction. So many of the shots felt fresh and modern in their approach even all these years later. He truly had a vision and knew exactly how to execute it. 4.5 stars. Then, a breezy refresher on fascism, 1940's The Great Dictator, written and directed by Charlie Chaplin. I oddly haven't seen very many classic Chaplin films, and I'm aiming to change that, starting with the very relevant The Great Dictator. I loved how playful and exuberant many sequences are, especially when juxtaposed with the very serious messaging of the film, but that's part of Chaplin's magic. One moment I'm cheering louder than I have for any sporting event ever when Chaplin booty bumps his floating globe, and the next I'm riveted to every word of Chaplin's fourth wall breaking monologue about the perils of not resisting autocrats. It's movie magic. 4.5 stars. Then I watched Temu John Wick on a Plane, Fight or Flight, written by Brooks McLaren and DJ Catrona, and directed by James Madigan. Can somebody get my boy Josh a halfway decent film? Dude's gasping for air choking on this slop. The plot's horrible, but it's that god-awful dialogue that made me the angriest. Things are rounded out by less than mediocre performances from everyone but Josh, and an unearned, peppy energy that grates after only a few minutes. 1 star. Then I broke my brain with 2004's Mind Game, written and directed by Masaaki Yuasa. My score for a film has never ping-ponged around as much as it did during Mind Game. It takes a while to get your feet under you with all of the chaos the film erupts with from the jump, using every crayon in the meth-addled crayon box of animation it's working with. The narrative goes to some wild places, yet still somehow makes the whole ride feel cohesive and more than worth it. On another day, my score might be much lower, but I was blown away in the way I always hope a film will blow me away, so 5 stars. Then stand back, Bergman's about to do his big one with 1966's Persona, written and directed by Ingmar Bergman. I love a film that's designed for the audience to connect their own dots to find its meaning, and Bergman really gives you a lot of runway to connect the film's dots in tons of ways. My own ideas about the film, who is really who, how events transpire, what is said versus what is imagined, all of those have changed and evolved since I saw this as I explore different interpretations in the ether. The stillness of Bergman's cinematography captures that sense of delicious unease that he utilized later to even greater effect in Cries and Whispers. I'd have to watch this a time or two more to let it fully crystallize in my mind, but it's very easy to see the level of skill, artistry, and emotionality bursting off the screen start to finish. 4.5 stars. Next, the horror movie of the year, Friendship, written and directed by Andrew DeYoung. Finally, a film that will come out and say it, men should always be accompanied by an adult. It would diffuse a lot of their ideas and schemes. It's a true cautionary tale. Tim Robinson is one of the funniest people currently walking the planet. See his show, I Think You Should Leave. The way he made his character in Friendship feel just as maniacally created as the characters he writes for himself is a testament to his comedic timing and sensibilities. There are some really nice heartfelt moments amid all the laughs and an immensely satisfying Connor O'Malley cameo, so I'm pretty sold. 4 stars. Up next, it's comedy incarnate with 1972's The Heartbreak Kid, written by Neil Simon and directed by Elaine May. I checked off the last Elaine May film I hadn't seen, and no shock, but it's a stunner start to finish. Neil Simon's funny, patient script is the backbone of the film, but it's Elaine May's spirited direction that makes everything feel so rosy and one of a kind. The entire cast is great, but it's Elaine May's real-life daughter in her Oscar-nominated supporting role as the lovably insufferable Lila that stands out from the rest. She gives Lila so many nuanced edges and moments of simultaneous revulsion and endearment. It's truly an amazing performance. 4.5 stars. Up next, Fruit of the Doom, it's 1940's The Grapes of Wrath, written by Nunnally Johnson and directed by John Ford. The Grapes of Wrath bravely asks the question, was the Dust Bowl really that bad? And turns out yes, it was very bad. I never read this book in school, but as someone who moved from the dour Midwest to California for brighter prospects, I basically have read the book, so I can say this is a very faithful adaptation. Another John Ford gem. 4 stars. Next, the franchise that scarred me as a kid is back to make sure I'll never set foot near an MRI, Final Destination Bloodlines, written by Guy Busick and Laurie Evans-Taylor, and directed by Zach Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein. Much like the characters in its own franchise, Final Destination has been evading its own cinematic death for longer than I would have thought. Bloodlines delivers on the campy, Rube Goldberg-style carnage audiences have come to expect, But the filmmakers go further, finding fun ways to subvert expectations and turn the formulaic into something closer to fresh. In particular, that opening 1960s set sequence is probably the best complete sequence in the entire franchise. More of that energy, please, if this franchise is gonna keep trucking its death logs down the highway with another film. 4 stars. Then I watched a psychological thriller staple, 1988's The Vanishing, written by Tim Kerba and George Slizer, and directed by George Slizer. I can't get The Vanishing out of my mind. Not that I'm trying to. It's a slow burn that takes things like free will and our own darkest thoughts and recontextualizes them in ways unsettling and stark. It's a great piece of revered Dutch cinema that oddly saw director George Slizer direct an American remake of his film with Kiefer Sutherland and Jeff Bridges that absolutely flopped. Go figure. 4.5 stars. Then I watched one of the most profound whodunits of all time, 2014's Calvary, written and directed by John Michael McDonough. Calvary follows Father James, a mild-mannered priest in a small Irish town who was told by an anonymous man in confession that he was abused by a priest growing up, and he's decided to kill the innocent Father James in order to draw greater outrage from the public. He gives Father James a week to get his affairs in order and then disappears. The rest of the film sees Father James investigating the citizens of his very small town, trying to figure out who his killer might be, only to realize how many people have religious demons of their own they're dealing with. It's an extremely engrossing and excellently paced journey that nails the tone and mood the story needs to resonate. My one main gripe would be the characters being somewhat over-exaggerated, but otherwise such a well put together film with a lot of smart decisions made in the planning and execution along the way. 4.5 stars. And I followed that up with another modern probing of religion, 2021's Benedetta, written by Paul Verhoeven and David Burke, and directed by Paul Verhoeven. Compared to the thoughtfulness and nuance of McDonough's Calvary, Benedetta is brash and unsubtle. It's interesting to see a film so different deal with very similar themes and ideas, albeit in an oops, all lesbians with delusions of grandeur edition. Paul Verhoeven is a versatile whiz behind electrifying films like Basic Instinct, RoboCop, and one of my all-time favorite films, Elle, but I don't think this succeeded much outside of some engaging visuals and committed performances. 2.5 stars. Up next, hide your knives, it's Bring Her Back, written by Danny Philippou and Bill Hinsman, and directed by Danny Philippou and Michael Philippou. I'm a big fan of the Philippou brothers' debut feature Talk to Me, but this follow-up didn't do much for me. I really liked certain scenes, especially the scene of two characters having a conversation back to back. It's pretty evident that crafting intriguing scenes isn't a problem for the Philippous. However, one challenging aspect of both films that I initially wrote off for Talk to Me, but now realizing it's a pattern I'm more concerned about, is just how much the Philippous beat their protagonists down. Putting obstacles in front of characters is integral to most every film, particularly horror films, but the way the Philippous brutalize their characters, rarely, if ever, giving them any sort of win, worsening the outlook with each passing scene, makes it hard to root for anyone or anything. I would point to either Ari Aster's Hereditary or Midsommar as examples of narratives that really pummel their characters, but the way they're told and presented to the audience intermingles authentic morsels of hope with all the despair. The Philippous may be quality filmmakers, but their storytelling is, well, brutal. 2.5 stars. Then my Kurosawa for the month, 1960's The Bad Sleep Well, written by Akira Kurosawa, Hideo Oguni, Eijiro Hisaita, Ryuzo Kikushima, and Shinobu Hashimoto, and directed by Akira Kurosawa. Not gonna lie, I was initially interested in watching this because I thought the title referred to a mystical well full of everyone's bad sleep or something, so realizing pretty quickly that it instead just means that bad people sleep well was disappointing. Regardless, it's a great film that's teeming with angst and anxiety and contains some of the most hyper-dramatic moments in Kurosawa's filmography. The opening half hour takes place at a high-profile wedding, with Kurosawa drawing out the tension and mystery before an anonymously sent item is unceremoniously wheeled into the middle of the reception and sends the story down its scandal and betrayal-fueled path. It didn't pop for me as well as other Kurosawa films, but still a very strong 3.5 stars. Up next, Warfare, written and directed by Alex Garland and Ray Mendoza. Warfare seems like war pretty unfair. This felt ambitious in a way I hadn't anticipated, giving the war genre an insightful new slant while keeping the narrative tight, tense, and nerve-wracking. I loved the cast, especially Tefero Unatai. Absolutely could have used more Charles Melton though. 3.5 stars. Then a Best Picture winner, 1958's Gigi, written by Alan J. Lerner and directed by Vincent Minnelli. Usually when I see something as simultaneously pretty and boring as this, I try to date it. I'm not sure whether the songs or the plot are the real poison pill here, so maybe it's just a nice melding of two weak elements combining to create a malaise of meh over most of the film. Leslie Caron is an interesting lead in most everything I've seen her in, so I'll bump it up a little to 2.5 stars. Then my letdown of the month, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, written by Christopher McQuarrie and Eric Jenderson, and directed by Christopher McQuarrie. The level of craftsmanship and technical prowess on display here is stunning, but par for the course for this franchise. What was really missing for me was the energy and propulsive sense of daring and fun that's been Mission Impossible's calling card over the last several films. The stunt work and sheer boldness of the set pieces is well above other modern action films, but there are far fewer of those big set pieces in The Final Reckoning, and they involve too much drawn-out setup and tedious prep work. I also didn't love where it ended up. Still, I don't feel good giving a film this polished anything less than 3 stars. Then I watched 1954's Magnificent Obsession, written by Robert Blees and directed by Douglas Sirk. All That Heaven Allows is still the superior Jane Wyman and Rock Hudson romance film from Douglas Sirk, but Magnificent Obsession's earnestness and slightly pulpy plot are pretty charming together. The story goes some surprising places that took me out of things more than pulled me in, but I can't think of another more grounded version that still gives you as satisfying a payoff in the end. Guess I should just leave the melodrama to Mr. Sirk. 4 stars. Up next, it's 1988's Dead Ringers, written by David Cronenberg and Norman Snyder, and directed by David Cronenberg. First off, if your gynecologist isn't crafting bespoke, witch-finger-shaped surgical tools, are they even really committed to science? As for the doppelganger-fueled film itself, I found it oddly to be one of Cronenberg's more straightforward films overall. I vibed with it more towards the end than the standoffish beginning, but Cronenberg rarely gives you boring regardless, so 3.5 stars. Then it's the Die Hard and It's a Small World ride crossover you didn't know you needed because you don't, G20, written by Caitlin Parrish, Erica Weiss, Noah Miller, and Logan Miller, and directed by Patricia Riggin. There are some pretty obvious problems with this, from the flat visuals to the bare-bones script, but one of the film's most glaring issues that I see most weak Die Hard regurgitations like this make is not putting thought into defining the space. One of the many reasons Die Hard works as well as it does is the audience has a clear understanding of the game board the characters are occupying, aka Nakatomi Plaza. They know where the hostages are being held, where the entrances and exits to the building are, the different pathways John McClane maneuvers through. The filmmakers even added a fold-out of a topless woman as a touch point for a particular corridor that John travels through several times to remind the audience they've been here before. G20 just plows right into the chaos without defining the besieged hotel as anything other than a random assortment of rooms. Viola and company pop up in the kitchen, the garage, the lobby, the laundry, all without any real thought put into how those places are connected, leaving the audience pretty disengaged. 2 stars. Then please remember to put return addresses on your mail. It's 1948's Letter from an Unknown Woman, written by Howard Koch and directed by Max Ophuls. This tale of unrequited love and voyeuristic longing is far and away the most romantic film of the month. It follows a renowned pianist and the woman who's always loved him from afar, slowly seeing their paths intersect amid the other noise in their lives. A love this pure and sad is normally reserved solely for Timothée Chalamet and the Knicks, but Joan Fontaine and Louis Jourdan are a close second. The next time you want to feel something, open this Letter from an Unknown Woman. 4 stars. Then the kickingest movie of the month, 1991's Once Upon a Time in China, written by Hark Sui, Kai-Chi Yuan, Yuming Lung, and Elsa Tang, and directed by Hark Sui. I had no idea 1800s China was a wacky 80s sitcom, huge if true, so the tone never really meshed with the content for me, but there are some nice set pieces and a dogged commitment to prioritizing the historical moment of the story, so 3 stars. Then, putting the meh in Marvel, it's Thunderbolts, written by Eric Pearson and Lee Sung-jin, and directed by Jake Schreier. I guess I liked the creative decisions that deviated from other bloated action films, but what the film did focus on didn't leave much of an impression. It's also hard to shake the feeling that this movie is first and foremost Kevin Feige's Frankenstein creation made up from lackluster droppings of the MCU. It never really makes a strong case for why it needs to exist. 2.5 stars. Then I watched 1944's The Woman in the Window, written by Nunnally Johnson and directed by Fritz Lang. Taking particular pains not to spoil the ending of this, The Woman in the Window is an episode of Fear Factor geared specifically for horny older married guys who still believe in trickle-down economics. Sure, there's death and cover-ups and lots of other noir calling cards floating around in the soup, but those all seem incidental because it's entirely focused on convincing guys with anger issues that they truly have the hardest life out of everyone. Very noble. 2.5 stars. Then one of the last Spielberg films I'd yet to see, 1974's The Sugarland Express, written by Hal Harwood and Matthew Robbins, and directed by Steven Spielberg. You could show an opening title card before literally any movie saying that the events that follow are based on true events that happened in Texas, and I'd believe you blindly because why wouldn't I? The Sugarland Express isn't as crazy a story in today's world, but it's still ahead of its time in the blending of news and entertainment. Goldie's great, and pre-Jaws Spielberg does an alright job keeping the story moving and intriguing. 3 stars. Then I checked into 1938's Hôtel du Nord, written by Henri Janssen and Jean Orange and directed by Marcel Carnet. This tale of forlorn romance had the emotionality I wanted in spades, but something was missing for me when it came to what all that emotion amounted to. Trying to avoid spoilers, the plot was woven together nicely, but just because big moments in the story feel poetic doesn't inherently make them narratively satisfying. For other 30s romances that channel their emotionality into something more impactful, I'd recommend 1932's One Way Passage, 1937's History is Made at Night, or 1939's Love Affair. 3 stars. Then A24, You Good? It's Death of a Unicorn, written and directed by Alex Sharfman. I'm really hoping A24 can turn things around in the second half of the year because their 2025 so far has been unusually shaky. Case in point, this strange film that has no idea what genre it's trying to be, let alone how to do that successfully. It jams a hefty amount of lore into a script that's struggling to define characters or come up with things to do before shit hits the fan. It really makes you wonder, Téa Leoni survived Raptors for this mess? 2 stars. Then some classic Garbo with 1930s Anna Christie, written by Frances Marion and directed by Clarence Brown. This was only my second Greta Garbo film after 1933's exquisite Queen Christina, and like before, her performance is the main draw of the film, offering her signature mix of bite and brooding. I think the script was a misfire for me, starting with a strong, patient examination of the handful of characters and devolving into a grating melodrama by the halfway point. I was also missing the pronounced level of emotionality that ran through Queen Christina, so 2.5 stars. Up next, a movie that's 90% gruff white guys sitting alone in a room, 1999's The Insider, written by Michael Mann and Eric Roth, and directed by Michael Mann. There's a ton of great subgenres of thriller, but one of my absolute favorites is facts-based thrillers. That 90s sweet spot where a thriller is chugging along, building intrigue, building tension, and then bam, a fax machine. All its jerky, slow movements, the sputtering sounds as it tries so hard to push out a mostly blank piece of paper with like 3 words scribbled on it. Doesn't get more cinema than that. Incidentally, The Insider is very good and shot wonderfully, but who cares, bring back fax thrillers. 4.5 stars. Then I watched 1946's The Razor's Edge, written by Lamar Trotti and directed by Edmund Goulding. Tyrone Power is one of the most charming, engrossing actors in cinema history. Without him, this would have been melodramatically average. Instead, Tyrone grounds it with an enamoring, patient performance that gives all the other larger and more flawed characters around him the contrast they need to be successful. Tyrone should be talked about up there with greats like Carrie, Jimmy, and Larry. 4 stars. And I finished the month with 1962's The Trial, written and directed by Orson Welles. This noir-tinged adaptation of Franz Kafka's novel follows Anthony Perkins as a man accused of a crime that's never explained as he struggles to get any crumb of an answer about his fate from the vaguely sinister world around him. Setting aside the film's medically insufficient levels of Jean Moreau, the gimmick of keeping the protagonist in the dark just out of arm's reach for help or information got fairly repetitive for me, which I understand is the point. Still, it doesn't inch this much out of the territory of an interesting cinematic experiment and into something more enriching for me. 3 stars. Let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on these movies, any others I should check out. Does anybody want to start a faxing club where we just fax cool shit to each other? Also stay tuned for other great commentary videos, reviews, video essays, and more. You can check me out on Letterboxd at CineraMadome24 or on TikTok at Film in the Blank. I appreciate you liking and subscribing. See you next time.